Welcome, everyone, to Too Much Music. Today, we are doing a show about a live show. We're going to talk about how we do a live show, how we've done it in the past, each of us individually, together, and how we're planning to do it in the future. And specifically, we're going to talk about gear and rigs that we use to do our live shows.
Whee! A gear show! These are the best kind. You know, everybody just wants to talk about gear all day. I am personally really excited about gear right now because I didn't redo my studio again. Like, it's basically the same, but I did just get a new studio computer, which, as you know, is freaking crazy and to be avoided at all costs.
Who loves dongles and iLock and registration keys? And okay. Mm-hmm.
Dude, honestly, I do love iLock at this moment because the thing is, if every plugin was just registered in iLock, me 10 years ago, I would never think I would say this, but if everything was just in there, it would have been a one-step, boom, bam, deactivate everything, activate everything. No problem. But now every company has their own thing. Everybody's a software company, so everybody's got their own thing. It took a week to get everything set up. But what's cool is I was able to make some ergonomic adjustments to my studio and get my desk a lot cleaner, so I have a lot more space to have, flexible setup on my desk.
Clean it up.
Clean it up. It's that minimal millennial. That's what
Alison actually sent me a video of this channel that only looks at and reviews pictures of people's minimal work desk setups. And I'm an old man. I'm just going to yell at clouds, but I just can't even for every reason in the world. You are not a gadget, and you are more than your productivity setup, folks. Okay?
Well, what blew me away about
whoever
that
needs
channel,
to hear that, I'm saying that to whoever needs to hear that right now.
I think plenty of people need to hear that because that channel has hundreds of thousands, if not millions of subscribers, and they have like hundreds of these videos where people basically what happens is this, and we will get to the podcast, people, but this is what you signed up for. So sorry.
You pay. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So what the guy actually does on the channel is people send him a photo so that he can judge how they have set up their laptop and extra monitors and all their LED lights. It's literally a judge my setup, which I guess is probably kind of a common thing that people do. And maybe it's more like a reality show, those reality shows where, people, but it's just a desk.
It's just a desk and probably has a nice cup of tea and a little succulent on it or something, which is not what people actually do at work. And if it is, I am so sad for them. And by the way,
succulents.
It's not even going to matter. AI is taking your jobs, and it's going to take the job of the desk ergonomics. Okay.
That just got dark.
It did. So, but
yeah, I'm super excited. I feel like I have really good access to all my stuff right now. And a lot of the impetus for that, segueing into our topic today, was that I really needed to have a powerful laptop because I'm starting to perform live with a computer. It's really certainly the first time I've ever performed live with basically only a computer. But I now have a setup where I can do that, and I just needed to get I wasn't sure how powerful a laptop I needed. Maybe that's a good thing to talk about right now. First off,
first, I want to just establish that I've been doing this since the 90s because it's true. And the way we did it back in the day is I would have to record anything in my studio on DAT tape. Right? Because you could, because they were, you're like, yeah, it's a kill face moment. Okay. So DAT tape anyway, and then I'd have to, there was no syncing. We didn't have SMPTE time code. We didn't have MIDI time clock. We didn't have, USB. So I've been doing this a long time, and you're going to find out in our different setups that my rule of gold, my golden rule, the rule of goldness for me is I want one box that does everything, and it has one cable. Not even. I want it wireless. A wireless magic box that has everything in it that I can just lift and put up my arm and set it down and magic comes out. That's what I want. And I want to get as close to that as I can. All right. Sorry. That's my old man interjection. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it might be a good time to pause and tell the listener that Greg may or may not have a vitamin deficiency right now. So if he starts to say things like rule of goldness,
I am drinking my coffee vitamins by the pot. So
I think this is going to be fun. Okay.
I told you.
So
yeah.
The thing that happened recently that, kind of precipitated a lot of action and change on my part was, and this is sad, I should take initiative and do things myself, but someone asked me to play a show with them. And they are a person that I've known for a long time, a friend of mine. Her name is Hina Cho. I have not spent a lot of time with her in person over the years, but we've been friends for like 20 years. And she's a cellist and also an electronic musician, plays keyboards and stuff. And she's from Austin, Texas. And she asked me to play a show with her in Chicago. And the way she said it was, do you want to play a noise show with me in Chicago? And I was like, just a minute. Let me go see if I can still make noise music, or if I even still know what that is. Because I haven't done that in quite a long time. Definitely, well over a decade and probably closer to 2. So I proceeded to go open Ableton and Max for Live and screw around for a while and came up with something I liked. So I got back on Signal and I was like, yes, I can make noise music. Let's play a noise show. And, it was like, at that time, it was like 4 months down the road. And then, it started creeping up on me. And I thought, oh, God, like, I need to really get on this. And so I started.
Let me ask you some questions. So now you have a show. You're going to do a totally different thing than you normally do. You're going to have to get on a plane with stuff in your bag that's not going to get messed up. That's going to fit in the carry-on or whatever and get checked and all that goodness, and you're going to have to show up and do the show. People do this all the time, but this was not how your setup was. You weren't ready for that. Your rig wasn't set up for this. So what did you need to consider, first of all, in terms of the gear that you were going to take, and how did that influence the actual? So just give us an overview of the rig and tell us about how that's going to influence the sounds you're going to make and the way you're going to process music and sound on the stage.
Yeah, so I basically knew, if you're looking at this, you can see my studio is full of synthesizers, I have guitars, I have lots of hardware that I typically use. So making music with just a computer is not something that I've really ever done. I have used the computer an awful lot. So my first concern was, can I really feel like I'm performing and doing something if I'm just triggering things or doing things in a computer or playing soft synths? Is that something, that's going to feel good and feel performative? Because that's really important to me. And so I knew immediately, what I would like to do. And I already had, at that point, when I was asked to do that, fortunately, I already had an Ableton Push, which is, let me see if I can, it's really close. Looks like this. It's a if you're just listening, she's holding up the Ableton Push 3, the standalone. No, it's not the standalone. Excuse me. It's not. It's the controller version, but it's a large black obelisk with white buttons. A grid of white buttons. So if you're not familiar with the Push, and probably most people who have even listened this long are, but it's a controller that is designed to work specifically with Ableton and take advantage of a lot of the features of Ableton that are specific to playing live. So I knew that would make sense to be part of it. Because I have to get on a plane, I'm not going to bring a big synthesizer. It's just not going to happen. So I thought, okay, well, what can I do then that's not just playing? I'm not a big fan of just playing a lot of soft synths, for an hour. So the approach I decided to take was really a sample-based approach. And what that meant was I was putting together sample instruments, in this case in Ableton, and a few synthesizers, a few soft synths, but mostly making my own samplers and create this sound world. And that was kind of my starting concept. The other piece of gear that I knew that I needed, and I'll show that, and then Greg can describe it too, is I needed a mixer.
So now we're looking at another black obelisk, but this one has sliders and rotary knobs and a few buttons as well.
This is what the sliders sound like. This is a Novation Launch Control XL, so it's been around for a very long time. And it's just it's actually really important what it has. I feel like they designed this thing perfectly for what I needed because it has 8 faders. It has 8 channels. The channels give you each a fader and then 2 aux sends, so knobs, and then a pan knob, as well as a couple buttons that do some things. So the important part about that is 8 channels. The Push also has 8 channels that display on screen at any given time. Now, you can move, if you have more channels than that in your Ableton project, you can move to, channels 9 through 16, but in the middle of a live set where you're doing a lot of stuff, you probably don't want to. So kind of the first rule of thumb for myself was to say, okay, I've got these 3 pieces. I've got a laptop, I've got the Push, I've got this mixer. This is the world that I can play in. So now how do I make a sound world that feels musical, that incorporates lots of change? And again, this is not beat-driven music. This is like kind of experimental / noise music.
This might be a great time to give the folks a nice little listen to what you did, because we're post-show now, and so we can actually travel back in time and hear the show via YouTube.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, let's do that. So I wasn't able to get any audio from the board, so unfortunately the audio you'll hear is, from the mic of my camera. But you'll at least get a sense for what kind of sounds we were making. It's also a little dark, but that's okay.
Dark in mood and in the visual. Okay, let's listen.
All right, here's a little bit, just a minute or two. So obviously,
so how did that work out for you? I mean, how do you feel about the way that all went? Sound check, did it all come out okay? And was it reasonable to deal with the gear that you chose?
The gear was extremely reasonable. I mean, so the show was at a place called Elastic Arts in Chicago, which if you're in Chicago or ever traveling there, it's a really, really cool space full of awesome people who want to see and hear wild music. So it was a night where it was Henna and me and then 2 other local folks. And the audience was very adventurous, and they were very kind, and they were very attentive, which feels good when you're playing music like that, because it's challenging music for a lot of people. Of course, those people self-selected. They came to an experimental music venue. So in terms of the gear, the setup could not have been easier. One of the nice things about the Push is if you're just playing, so Henna had her own rig, cello rig with pedals and cello, and she had all, she just needed a direct box, and they did that. And then the Push has an interface built into it, an audio interface. So if you don't need a lot of ins and outs, which I did not, you can simply hook the Push up to your computer, select it as your audio interface, and use its outputs. It has a main stereo output, and just send that straight into a board. And that's indeed what I did. So it was literally There was a stereo DI on stage. I plugged straight into it. It was the easiest thing in the world. So in terms of the setup, everything was perfect.
So I want to ask, you were playing with a computer on stage. The laptop was the brains of everything you did. How did you feel about that? Were you nervous? Were there any, considerations there?
Yeah, I was nervous. I don't really love to perform with just a laptop. In fact, I've never performed with only a laptop in my life. Hannah happened to have a sampler with her that I'm familiar with, the SP404, which I know. So that was our fallback. Was that if my computer crashed, I would go grab that and we would just jam out.
Very smart. Very smart.
Yeah, because you can't have no fallback. And of course, I also had some, if Ableton crashed, I had some files on my desktop that I could just play real fast in VLC to get sound going, which is always key. But yeah, no, I don't love that. And the laptop, I had to buy a new laptop to do it at all because my old laptop is a very small Ultrabook because I haven't used it for music. And the one I ended up using for the show was not one that I ended up keeping. But it did work, and I had no problems. So, 1 out of 1 shows where I've used a lot. I have a 100% success rate right now.
Excellent. And so, and for those listeners who aren't musicians or who haven't tried playing live at this point, let me just sort of say that this is a very delicate and difficult situation because listeners expect listeners of all kinds, no matter what their experience level is, they expect a finished sound coming out of the speakers in most situations. Even so, if you have a drum set playing in a bar room, it sounds terrible. It always has. That's never going to change. People expect to hear something much more processed and finished. Usually, not all the time, but most of the time. So it's a struggle to try and deliver this processed sound that we get in our studios, but still create everything as live as we can. And that's what you were doing, right, Alison? You were performing on the push as if it's an instrument. It's literally a performance instrument. And you were performing even though the sound coming out was really quite polished and sounded maybe studio finished. So that you managed to succeed there, but that's a tough thing to do for anyone, no matter what you're doing, whether you're playing the piano or playing a full modular gear rack or whatever.
Yeah, it is tough. I think that's one of the hardest things about electronic music, actually. People give rock bands a pass on this.
Mm-hmm.
A rock band can sound kind of raw and people are fine with it. They almost always do, except at the biggest shows.
Yeah.
If you go to any club, small club, even medium-sized clubs, the band's not going to sound like they do on their albums. It's just not going to happen. And people are fine with that. But if it's just a computer, I don't know, maybe people would be fine with it. I don't know. But you feel as a musician, you feel like I have the tools here. I need to create something, very crafty.
Yeah.
This is actually probably a good time to move to talking about your recent live rigs, which are also computer-based and a lot more complicated,
well,
actually.
in some ways, because so I did a show the summer of 2022 at National Sawdust. I can pull up here and present. Let me show you that. But
while you're pulling it up, I'll just introduce and say that, for those who don't know, Greg is a spatial audio person.
Yep.
So Greg creates experiences with many, many, many speakers, which is very complex and not quite. It's becoming more a normal thing to do, but it's pretty tough. So yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah. So at the National Sawdust, which is in Brooklyn, New York, they had here. I don't need to tell you. I have a little video here that I made for the show that will explain it. So let's listen to that maybe. I'm working on a project with National Sawdust at the moment. They are a new music performance venue in Brooklyn, New York. And just before the pandemic hit, they installed a massive new sound system, 102 high-resolution speakers in collaboration with Meyer Sound. It's a lot of speakers. Where are those speakers? Well, they are in the walls and in the ceiling of the performance space. So there are speakers now in front of the audience, behind the stage, to the sides of the audience, behind the audience, and above the audience in the ceiling. It is an immersive sound environment. And as a composer who works in immersive sound environments, I thought it would be fascinating to take the evening and walk through why it is that many speakers is interesting from a creative perspective. So we begin the evening with a monophonic work, a piece where sound only comes from one point in space at any given time. And that limitation offers interesting creative opportunities for the composer that you can't do with more than one speaker, or even with an acoustic ensemble. We then double the speaker count to stereo, double again to quadraphonic, 8 speakers, etc. We keep expanding the rig until we have maximized the system. And as interesting as it is to look at the technical reasons for how that works and how that developed from the first sound recorders to complex computer systems that control this immersive environment, we're not doing that. We're looking at the creative opportunities that each of these different configurations provides the composers. So I'll pause that there. But the idea then is that I had to bring with me on a tiny propeller plane a rig that fit in my bag, and I didn't even have checked baggage. Whatever I brought with me had to fit in the wing of the plane. I had to bring this rig that could power that 102 speaker setup, and it was 36 channels of audio that was surrounded the audience. As you probably noticed,
this guy always wears, if you're just listening and not seeing the video, one of the funny things that's happening right now is that Greg is in a really nice, lovely flannel shirt and fall colors. And then in the video he just played you from 2 years ago, he is also wearing a different, really nice, lovely flannel shirt with fall colors. So this guy wearing his flannel shirts is like, yeah, I had to pack up my immersive audio rig into a propeller plane. Who is this guy? What's happening?
Well, yeah, so I live in the mountains, and the only way to but I can get to New York in about an hour. Well, an hour plus a shuttle ride. But I have to fly out of the mountains, and to do that, I needed to bring this little tiny pack of gear and all the cables. So actually, Alison was coming to the show, so I had her drive the cables down to, do you remember? I had you
that's right.
drive a bag of cables because they just weighed a ton, and I had to drag them all over Manhattan, so I didn't want to do that.
Right, and there were weight limits also.
Yes, the plane is going sideways down. So, yeah, so anyway, what I ended up doing was just cramming my bag full of audio interfaces that could be synced up so that and a small Mac Mini. Now, we were talking about computers on stage. Nobody wants to walk that tightrope. But in this case, what I did is I bought a Mac Mini, had it wiped clean, and installed only Reaper and only the sound spatialization software that was going to, it hasn't been on the internet in 2 years, maybe 3 years. So it's not updating. It's locked. I've tested the heck out of it. So anyway, I trusted this machine. I still do, to run and to work. And I knew the throughput was going to be okay. So I did it. You might notice I'm in an immersive studio here, meaning I could test what would have become. So I had a baby version of this dome here in my place, in my studio. I could test the sound. And then when I got to the venue, we had just a few hours. But in those moments when you have a few hours to set up and go, yes, we were in New York. We could have run out and grabbed a cable. But if anything else has gone wrong, right? I mean, yeah.
It was a very specialized setup. And the music, I know because I was there, but it was fixed media, right? You weren't actually there was no one performing.
And that's the big difference between what I was doing, what you were doing. You were interacting with live granular synthesizers and reverb and effects and processing, and I was
another person.
And a whole nother person. And luckily I was just plugging into this massive custom Meyer sound studio. I mean, there's nothing else like it in the world, but I was plugging directly into that. And but I just had to hit go and make sure that things were working, and if they didn't, so in my case, I'm a performer, but this is not what I was doing in this case. So,
yeah, it was more like by that point in the process, you were more of a technician than anything, just making sure, an engineer, just making sure that that all of the audio was coming out the proper areas of the hall at the proper times. And it came off. I can tell you as an audience member, it was incredible. It was one of those experiences that you never forget if you're an audio person.
It was a once in a lifetime for me too. I probably won't get another. Well, maybe I will. It was a lot. It was a lot of amazing speakers. It was more than $1 million worth of speakers in there. It was something
great. Hearing, I mean, this is going to put me in nerd territory, but hearing the Stockhausen piece, Gesang der Jünglinge, in its original multi-channel format, which I've never heard. I've heard that piece 100 times. I love that piece. I've never heard it as it was meant to be heard, and it was amazing. It was like, I mean, I just got chills just thinking about sitting there listening to it. It was truly a new piece, even though it was already, you could tell it was good, you can tell it's good by listening in stereo, but it's not the same. I would say that a lot of the compositional decisions that I grew up listening to it too, and a lot of the things that were happening spatially, I did not understand, did not know. It made the whole thing far more transparent than it feels like when you're listening in stereo. Yeah. Of course, that's what it does. And then you can hear the intricacies much more clearly. But the point there, because I wrote music and I had composers that were on the new living composers that were on that program, and the point is that all that processing work happened over about 2 years, not consistently, but it was many, many, many long months of work to prepare all of that music, and then a couple hours to fly on the plane and deliver it. So that's a different kind of setup that is very specialized. I'm doing another show in New York this fall. This time it will be for only 8 speakers, but it will involve a pianist. So I'm writing a piece. The pianist is Marilyn Nonken. I'm writing a piece for her. Some other composers are, and she's playing some of her sort of standard repertoire, but all of it will involve immersive sound and live piano. So that's another similar challenge, and I'll use the same rig to deliver that there. But this is a different type of space, right? This is not National Sawdust, and they don't just have a multi-channel, multi-million-dollar multi-channel installation built into the walls. So how are you going to deal with getting how does that work? Yeah, so the good news for me is that the interface situation is far simpler. It's much cleaner. 8 channels is a lot less to worry about. But we have to rent the speakers and bring them in, and they're not going to be time aligned and, matched in all these perfect ways. So we're going to have to bring the speakers in and set them up in very quick time, connect everything, and then coordinate. Because we have a live performer now, we have to deliver a monitor to her. Every piece is different, has different needs for her to hear, and we can't interfere with the immersive sound in the room. So she's going to have an in-ear monitor, at least in one ear, I think, for some click tracks. And in other cases, it'll be a feed of audio to make sure she can hear. Because if you performed on stage, you know very well that when you're sitting behind the instrument, you can't hear what the audience is hearing at all. You don't hear what's going on out in the concert hall. And with an immersive speaker system, all the speakers are out there around the audience, not around the pianist. So it sounds like magic when you're in the hall listening, but to the pianist, they need a special monitor to hear where the computer parts are and whatnot. But those are fixed media as well. We specifically decided not to involve interactive electronics because the technological challenges, especially in a space that's not actually tailored to an immersive system, they're just too great. Too many things can go wrong, and we only have a few hours to set it up on the day, November 15th. Yeah. I know you and I had talked some months ago about that maybe you would perform on a synthesizer or something with her, and even maybe have the piece be improvisational. But it sounds like you decided not to do. It sounds like you decided to go the fixed media and the fixed score way. Is that right? That's right. And in doing that, as a pianist myself, and having performed to fixed media before, I know that what I have to do is deliver a piece that anything could happen, everything could go wrong, and as long as everybody basically hit play at the same time, everything will end up at the end in the same way. So that I have to prepare for all of the potential disasters. Not that there would be any, but it's my job. And this is something I notice with a lot of other pieces that composers write, is they sort of leave it, say, hey, it's the performer's problem to deal with this, to deal with synchronization. And I just don't agree with that. I think it's my job to actually make it as simple and clear as possible, similar to what I would do to, a pianist working with an ensemble. But it's funny you say that. I was thinking back to the show with Hannah, the cellist, you know, I think the intention with that show was that it would be 100% improvisational. But as I started to prepare, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, I'm not a composer. That's not how I think of myself. I think of myself as a songwriter and as, you know, a producer of sorts, somebody who puts things, but I just don't, I have not many times in my life, even though I was a theorist and studied hundreds at least of scores very deeply, I've not written scores very much myself. But I felt a real pressure, kind of like you're describing, when I was really thinking about this performance and really preparing for it because, yeah, I mean, she's sitting there, she's a performer, she has a cello, she has pedals, she could do something if things went wrong. But as the person, you know, you kind of feel like as the person with the computer, like, I have to be the one to make sure everything's on track. So I ended up making a score for the piece.
Oh, can we see it?
We can.
Let's look, and I'll describe it in my.
Okay. Oh, that'll be fun.
With dulcet tones.
I'm gonna do this.
Here
we go. The piece was called "On Sand."
Ennui on sand. Okay. So we're looking at a formal score. We have a timeline, a rough timeline up top. Interesting. So I'm just reacting. This is a composer reaction video. But she has some general verbiage, very simple to read, you know, statements describing, a narrative essentially, and the narrative that the cellist is meant to play. And then there's 8. Those
are actually 8 channels.
8 channels.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I ended up doing was creating a structure for myself because I wanted to be improvisatory as well, which I was able to be. But I needed a general outline of what I was going to do. And this was really more for Hannah. I didn't really need this. And in fact, I didn't actually use it in the performance. But I made this more to send to Hannah beforehand. And I sent her some basic recordings, you know, of myself without her performing the music so that she could have a sense of what was going to happen. Because I didn't think it was fair. You know, we had to play for 45 minutes. I mean, that's a freaking long time. That's what you know, if it was 10 minutes, sure, just show up and do it. But 45 minutes it's a lot of music.
Like 4.5 times longer.
It's a good, this guy does not have a vitamin deficiency.
I'm fine. I like your score. I think it's very clear and very clean and easy for you to make. Yeah.
Yeah, it was easy to make. I am not a person who's going to spend a lot of time on that. If you know me, you know that. But it was very effective in giving her an idea of what was going to happen, I think. And also, you know, making sure that, like you're saying, it's just not okay to get up on stage and have something go wrong. I mean, you just really have to plan for every eventuality. So, and especially when you have a pianist, well, any other performer, I mean, but the pianist that you have for the show is really, really good, and you want to be sure that she has a chance to do what she does, right?
She is stone cold pro. She's been doing this. I mean, she was a student at Eastman before me, about 10 years before me, and she took New York by storm when she left, and she's a professor at NYU, head of the piano department, I think, at NYU.
Oh, is she? She's like a new music specialist pianist, right? I mean, she does new music.
Yes. That's what has happened. As she points out in one of her books, like every pianist plays everything, and somehow they get known for something, and that becomes the label they carry for a while. And but that's what she does. She does new music. So this is a great time, though, to talk about where we're headed and what we're doing next, because we've had lots of experiences over our careers. We were sharing some of the more recent ones and the different challenges there. But all of this, last summer, Alison and I played a show. We think we've talked about it on the podcast. We played a show on my YouTube channel. I've got several videos about the process preparing for it. But we played a show featuring, it was Alison's songwriting persona, playing her music and a couple of co-created things, but mostly her music. And I was supporting that with synth playing, live keyboard playing. But we each
also known as shredding, which is what you did.
Shredding. I was shredding. Here, I'll just play a little. I have it queued up here. Let's play a little tasty taste a clip of that live show. Let's see.
I want a nasty clip.
All right, here we go.
All right. So tell me about your
decimal.
Thank you. I love decimal too.
Yeah. So
you got to write songs about Dewey Decimal once in a while. If you don't, what have you got really?
So okay. So check that out on Alison's channel. So you can hear the whole concert. But the point there is Alison had a pretty standard setup, although it was more sophisticated and complicated than it looks. But she had live vocal processing that needed to sound and feel and look, in every way like it was studio polished, and a guitar that she could play during interludes and such. And then I had sort of charge of everything else. We had backing tracks, which we will never do again, but we had to have those in that particular case. And then I had 3 synthesizers with me and an external effects unit that I was moving between. And we tried to make as much of it live as we could possibly do without looking like, manic, crazy people.
Right. Well, it's important to note about the music that music has a lot going on.
Because we built it in the studio. In fact, we traded it between Alison's studio and my studio, and not all of it, but a lot of it got added to in different places at different times. It was a 2-year album process for you on those songs. And then the Gary Newman cover was done in the point is that you can't just bring one synthesizer to that show and one guitar and expect to cover all that sonic.
And it's a real problem.
Landscape.
I mean, this is the eternal problem, right, for people who make studio music and then try to go play it live. Is like, do you sacrifice all of the incredible arranging that you've done and the orchestration and the timbres you've carefully crafted to just have it be fully live, or do you hit play on a backing track, which is what we did in that case, and you get that great sound, and people notice, they feel the difference. Like, it sounded good in that room, but it was not fun. I did have fun doing the show.
Yeah.
It was, I find it stressful, as opposed to a fixed media thing in electronic music, which is a little different.
Well, and the reason I think is this: you were talking about a naturally improvisatory structure, the song writing. You want to pop in, pop out. You want to let a solo run its course and go as long as it wants to be. You want to decide to play kazoo for 10 minutes, whatever the mood is, but you can't. We had everything timed to the bar, and we had to remember all of that. That's the other thing that was just maddening. And if you slipped, either of us slipped, we'd have problems. Luckily, we rehearsed pretty well for a week beforehand, but
we rehearsed for a day.
Why do I think it was a week? It felt like a week.
It's your sense of time is slipping.
Oh man, into the future. All right. So, oh boy. So, well, the point of this is we did that show. It really was a fun show. It was a great experience. Well,
tell me about your synth rig in that show and what made you pick.
Yeah.
That rig. So we had backing tracks. It had some parts pulled out for sure, and obviously some parts were lengthened for solos and stuff like that. But in general, it was a pretty full mix.
Yep.
But you had 2 synths on stage, and I had a guitar. So why did you pick the synths you picked, and how did that work?
So very specific. I made those backing tracks, and specifically, I pulled out everything that wasn't a signature sound to the track. I made everything that was extra out. I took it out, and I put the bass and the drums way up high so that we, had
so
that,
like pads,
all
kind of backgroundy synths.
Yep. Anything that wasn't the meat of the texture there. Yeah. And I did that so that I could do that on stage and essentially try to be the front end of the backing band. So I needed 2 synths minimum. I needed a polysynth that had a wide range of synthy sounds that I could build and play from. And then I needed a super flexible lead synth to solo and shred on. And in fact, what I ended up taking the Prophet Rev 2 as my polysynth, 16 voice. I mean, it's, people don't give that's one of the most underrated synths that there is, because both Alison and I have one. If that says, we don't share anything in our studios. Like,
I was just thinking, that's the only synth we have in common.
Yeah.
Is the Prophet Rev 2.
Because when you need the glue, it's not a feature synth. It's not going to sit in the front usually, but when you need the meat, it delivers.
Or the sparkle.
Yeah.
For me, that's when I'm like, I just need something, that just instantly sparkles. It just sounds, its high end is like crisp, 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 and not in a bad way.
It just sounds expensive. But
it does.
The point is that...
Did you just quote Justin Bieber?
I did, because it just sounds expensive. Yeah.
I don't know when it must have been like 12 years ago that we saw that YouTube video where Justin Bieber, he's still a pretty small little man.
Yeah.
And he's getting interviewed by somebody as if he had anything to do with anything that he made. And the person asked him about a sound, and he goes, "Yeah, man, it just sounds expensive." And I just can't. Yeah. But he's right. It does sound expensive.
Yep, it does. It sounds expensive. And so that was going to be my poly. That was good. And I love it, not per function on the, it was fantastic. It can do anything. So and it sounded better than anything on the backing track live. It sounded so good. Better than what a lot of the stuff you used. I don't think you had the Rev 2 when you made that album, actually.
No, mostly I did not. The polysynth I had was the Minilog XD, which is far inferior.
Right. Yes, that's right. That was your replacement. So anyway, then I brought the lead synth, and that was the subsequent 37, the Moog, which I have videos on my own channel about this, because I've just never to this day played anything more organically impressive and responsive. It's the most amazing instrument I have. I will never part with it, and I almost have bought 2 just in case, so that I always have one. But it's a mono synth, and it is mono, and we were playing, so I needed to widen that sound and embiggen it, and it doesn't have effects. So what I did is I added the Strymon Volante, which is a magnetic tape delay replicator modeler. Sounds unbelievable on that thing. And then I did a strange extra thing because I could. It happened to be on the same stand. I used my Polyvox clone, which is super old Russian synth, but it's a modern Siberia-built clone of it. But it's a nasty, gritty, aggressive-sounding synth, which we used a lot in the show. But I played both essentially. I MIDI'd them up and played them both, and I did all the sound design live on stage for the lead sound, which was fun as hell. It was a little risky, but I got to just shape all the sounds I wanted. Things got a little out of control a couple of times, but that was fun because you're recovering and shaping. So anyway, sorry, we're belaboring that a little bit. The point is that was a lot of stuff. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot. Okay, I have 3 synthesizers, but we were moving. There was an act before us or after us, and after us. So we had to shove everything into a corner, and we had these expensive synthesizers, and there's cables everywhere. We had a 12-channel mixer just maxed. Given what we had to put in it. It was a lot to set up and to get right. And again, I said earlier, I want my Magic Box to be one wireless unit that plays all sounds. But
it's impossible.
It's impossible. It's impossible. It is also what we learned in that show, and Alison alluded to this a minute ago, it's made less possible when you create a studio album that is not meant to be played live, and then you try and get it to happen live. That was something we learned not to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of musicians have to do exactly that all the time, and there are ways to do it, but the only way to really do it, if you have an album like mine that you're trying to play, you have to have a big band. I mean, I think it would have taken 10 people.
Well, back
to play that.
Even back in the, well, say back in the day, but even bands like Depeche Mode, they would bring racks of samplers on tour that all had the sounds they built in the studio loaded up. And then somebody would on stage just play, there's 5 notes that were dedicated to this one sound and then the next 5 notes to the next sound. And it was just trigger all the sounds live on stage that they made in the studio, because you can't do that live on stage generally.
Well, and that's such a really interesting, that's the obvious answer, if you have access to samplers or sampling technology. It's so tough, though, because you want to be sure that as a performer, you have something creative to do, right? But it needs to be reasonable.
Well,
and I think...
And we also learned that a Depeche Mode show is going to be click-tracked and exactly timed, and there is no variation. But we want fluidity and variation in our show. We want to take it wherever we want to take it. And that's where we're going today. That's what we're doing now. We're setting up.
Yeah, we're working on a new live setup, and it's going to involve just creating new music, because what we want to do is we've kind of honed a process of working together that is musically working super well now. I think our last Dr. Body album, which is our duo together, it's really freaking good. Sorry, people.
If you do say so yourself.
Yeah. Well, I from my perspective, it's one of my favorite things I've ever made, and I feel like we really found a way to make music together that worked for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it used many of the same instruments. So we didn't have the Blix Byrd problem of everything in the kitchen sink. But the instruments some of them are vintage, some of them are modulars. We can't play all that live.
No, it wasn't. We tried to conceive it that way, and we didn't quite get there. But the way we basically did it, the way it worked, and this was just a kind of a process we stumbled onto, honestly. Usually with most of the songs, it would start with some weird sound that I had created at some point, which I have a huge sample library. I'm always just making weird sounds and saving them. And so we were in my studio, and I was just playing things for Greg, and he would hear one and go, "Ooh, I know what to do with that." And, we'd crank up the Yamaha CS15 or something, the Iridium, and he would play something, and that would be the start of, this brand new music that we were making. And that worked really well. Then, we sort of just let him go, because as a performer and as an improviser, he's super, super good and has all kinds of great ideas. So I let Greg go in the studio, compiled a whole bunch of stuff for several different tracks. He as a composer, too, has a plan the whole time. Everything he's making sort of, it's going to fit together, and I can kind of see how. But then I had this whole pile of stuff that he'd recorded that I then arranged in a basic arrangement, and then it went to Greg's studio where he did a few other things and mixed it. I also did vocals during my part during the arrangement. So it was very much it was close. It was almost performative, the recording process. But this time, we're going to do a new thing. I don't know if it's going to be a recording or not, but this time we're going to start from a slightly different perspective. Yeah.
And we're going to grab a couple of instruments, and we'll spend a few days up in Alison's studio with those instruments, working out materials and ideas and such. But then when we have our basic plan and we've got our MIDI time code and SMPTE sync running and all the fancy tricks, then we'll take it down into a video recording area that she has in her home, and we will play without a net, essentially, and we will build. So we'll have our framework, similar to what you did with Henna. We'll have a framework for songs. We'll know basically what we want to accomplish in the course of the song, and then we will just play them, improvising live with the instruments that we chose, nothing more, and capture what we're making, and capture it in a multi-track format so we can take it home and mix it. But that's the idea, that we build it as a live show. It's done live, recaptured live, and forever will be able to be repeated, but never the same way, live.
And that means for my part, what I have to do is I'm going to be using that same basic setup that I was using before, maybe one instrument, but I'll have the Ableton Push. I'll be using Bitwig. I'll have the little mixer so I can very quickly mute things or bring them up, bring them down, add send effects, all in real time. And what we're doing, kind of just, I don't know, the way I'm thinking of it is I'm going to jumpstart the whole thing by I'm putting together a whole bunch of, and I have a lot, but I want to do new stuff. I'm just like cruising around my studio once a day and creating new bits. These aren't tracks. They're musical ideas, but that's all they are. They're not developed. They're just improvised musical ideas. And that way we can kind of snip those up into pieces. We can use that to hit the lever on Greg's improvisational magic, so that he can just, start hearing the weird way that he hears and start playing. And I think it is going to be a lot like what I did at the Chicago show with Henna. It's going to be a lot of, me building samplers for myself, me building granular synthesizers. So it will have, like the On Sand piece, it could have a score like that, right? It could. Yeah. I don't know. I doubt we'll do that, but it will be very improvisatory. Vocals will be around, but they will be, just kind of coming in sometimes. It's not going to be, these will not be songs. Yeah, the point though, and just in terms of my gear, you can't see almost any of my studio with this zoomed in shot if you're watching, but there's a lot of different instruments actually all around me. And I won't take a vintage piece because it's vintage and they're fragile. But what I will do most likely is take the Groove Synthesis Third Wave and the Moog Matriarch, which is back there behind me. Those two are super powerful and couldn't be more different. The Moog Matriarch is a discrete component analog powerhouse with no presets and no memory, and you just sculpt sound real time on the synth. The Third Wave is a super deep chameleon. It's a magic box of digital genius that can do so many things, and I can have some things planned out on that. So that's what I'm thinking about at the moment. Remains to be seen. So two-tier keyboard stand, big polysynth, and then, the Matriarch, which is, that's duophony, right? Wait.
Well,
it's not a polysynth.
No, it's paraphonic, but it'll play four voices at once in certain modes. But you can make it a monosynth. You can do many things with it.
That's right.
It's wild, but hard. I'm gonna have to master it. That's part of the fun of this, though. I have to master this thing to
because the Matriarch is not a live synth. It's most people probably don't take that on stage.
I've never seen or heard of that. And in fact, when I was looking for mine, I bought mine new, but when I was looking at used ones, I talked to a guy who was a sound designer, scored films, and he's like, this takes too long. It's so gorgeous, but it takes so long to make a sound, and it's so complicated. I don't have time for that when I'm under the clock for a project. The Third Wave is going to be on my video channel, my YouTube channel. I've got sound design examples of the Third Wave where I'm trying to turn it from a massive poly into a surgical monosynth. So anyway, I think it'll work. And here comes young Peanut.
This is Peanut, and even the audio people probably know she's here because she is circling like a shark and growling.
Oh, why is she growling?
I think she's trying to tell me something about where she needs to go.
Oh, well, and that's okay. We have come to the end of our show about a live show.
About a show.
About some other shows that we did. So thank you so much for joining us. As always, I guess like and subscribe. Peanut is waving goodbye for those who can't see. I'm Greg, and that's Alison. And until next time, be well. We'll see you.
Bye, everybody.